Well, it's important to realize that intelligent design is not a new idea. We find intelligent design ideas in the Greek philosophers, and the great church historian Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century also wrote quite a lot about intelligent design. It really receives its classic statement in the post-Enlightenment period in the work of William Paley, who wrote a book entitled Natural History. And in this book he argued that one could infer design based on the complexity of a structure. His great example that is often quoted is if you are walking across a heath and you discover a rock and you ask yourself, how did this come to be? Well, the answer is simple. It just is part of the natural order. It just came to be because it's here. There's no necessary explanation for it. But if one were to encounter a watch lying upon the heath, one would not infer that it had come to be there by random forces, but rather it had been designed. And Paley goes on to argue from nature, the structure of the eye, and various biological structures in organisms, that there must be a designer because there are so many things that appear to be designed. So the idea is not new, it's been around. The modern ID movement really has its beginning in the work of Philip Johnson, a lawyer from Boat Hall, University of Berkeley, California. Johnson wrote a book called Darwin on Trial, in which he effectively put evolution and Darwin on trial and argued that there were major problems with the theory and it had gaps that could not be filled, and that therefore it was not the only possible theory, that other theories should be entertained. His attack on the theory of evolution opened up the movement. He becomes its major organizer and its cheerleader. And around him, a number of other people gather. In the mid-90s, the Discovery Institute was founded as a major focal point for intelligent design proponents. Out of the Discovery Institute, a subsidiary organization develops, the Center for the Renewal of Science and Culture. And this organization, together with the Discovery Institute, promote the major ideas of the ID movement and serve as a focal point for all their energies. After Johnson's book in '91, a number of symposia are organized, and not just at conservative or obscure institutions. Queen's College, Cambridge hosted a symposium, and Yale University hosted a symposium. So the movement has gained quite a bit of credence, and its membership are not only associated with conservative institutions. There are people with good credentials in the movement, and so it has to be taken seriously even if one finally decides to reject its ideas. For the sake of simplicity, I'd like to focus on two major players in the modern ID movement. The first is Michael Behe. Michael Behe is a biochemist from Lehigh University, and his book, published in 1996, is called Darwin's Black Box. The black box refers to the cell. Behe argues that until cellular biology was developed, there was no knowledge of the complexity of the mechanisms within the cell, and therefore there was no problem in assuming the cell had simply evolved by a simple process or some process. Behe says that the cell, and he's correct in this, is highly complex and is full of molecular machines, tiny structures with several parts that carry out important functions within the cell. One of Behe's main ideas is the idea of irreducible complexity. Irreducible complexity refers to the notion that there are some systems that are so complex and the interlocking parts are so mutually dependent that if you were to take any one part away, the structure would no longer function at all. And Behe argues that there is no evolutionary path from a set of simple structures that accumulate into larger structures and into a final structure, that really one has to have all the parts of the complex structure for it to function at all. Now, He also argues that irreducibly complex structures must be designed. They could not have evolved. And this is the center of his argument. It's really a different form of William Paley's argument from his 1812 volume on natural theology. But Behe puts it on steroids and gives it a modern legitimacy. Behe's book has been highly influential in the movement and is referred to very often. The second person I want to talk about in the ID movement is William Dembski. He is a philosopher, and two of his books that were published in the late 1990s are very important to the movement. The first is a reworking of his dissertation entitled The Design Inference, and the second book is entitled Intelligent Design. Both of these books add philosophical sophistication to the movement. Dembski's central point is that design is empirically detectable within nature and therefore is a proper object of science. He uses a number of technical terms that he has coined himself that one needs to understand the ID movement, because they're used among the proponents of the movement. The first is specified complexity. By this term, he refers to complex structures within nature that evince a pattern of order that cannot be explained by evolutionary naturalistic explanations. He sets up a model that he calls an explanatory filter, by means of which one can detect within nature what is designed by an intelligent being and that which merely evolved by natural processes. Dembski also uses the term complex specified information, which is another way of referring to structures and processes within nature that have been designed as opposed to those which merely evolved by natural processes. And finally, he uses the term the law of small probability, by which he means that certain events or processes within nature have such a small probability of having happened by chance or random occurrence that they must be considered the result of design or intelligence. And these ideas and his articulation of them have created a philosophical legitimacy for the intelligent design movement. And Dembski has been one of the most active recently of the intelligent design proponents and is perhaps one of the best known. He was head of a Science and Religion Institute at Baylor University up until a few years ago, and now he is starting other movements and institutes to promote his ideas. It's important to remember that part of the ID movement strategy is to attack evolution on its own merits. That is, to point out places where evolution as a theory has gaps or holes as they see it. And it's true that the theory of evolution has not explained everything. There are places where the data is insufficient, where the research needs to go further, but science feels that that will happen, that more explanations will be found where there are gaps. The intelligent design movement argues that some of these gaps are not closable. They cannot be overcome. That in fact the only way to explain the gap is to posit an intelligent designer who has intervened in the evolutionary process to bring life to the next stage or to create some new complex structure that is necessary for life to evolve. The attack on evolution as a theory really is intelligent design's inheritance from the creation science movement. Attacking evolution was a mainstay of the creation science movement. It is less of a mainstay in the intelligent design movement, but still very important. The argument really is, if one can discredit the theory of evolution, one has proven the presence of an intelligent designer. This might be seen as a false inference by some, but all negative evidence against evolution in this way of thinking counts as positive evidence for intelligent design. The creation science proponents and the ID proponents have linked together. And so you have within the intelligent design movement people who really are creation science folk and believe in a young earth. And you have people like Behe who believe entirely that the earth is very old, as geologists tell us. And Behe also believes that evolution is the explanation for the emergence of life. He just believes that God has tampered with the process. Now, the ID movement, if it did not have evolutionary science to argue against, would fly apart, because within this big tent of intelligent design, we have different perspectives that are not compatible. And I think that's an important point to remember, that intelligent design is itself full of fractures that only hold together because there is a common enemy, the theory of evolution and its proponents. Now, it's important to distinguish two different kinds of naturalism. Methodological naturalism is the assumption of science. Science believes that everything can be explained by natural explanations, and this is a necessary part of its method. It does not ever allow God in the door of the laboratory. It never uses God did this, God changed this as part of its explanation. And to do that, for scientists, is tantamount to the end of science, because once God is brought into scientific explanations, the science is compromised. The second kind of naturalism that I want to define is metaphysical naturalism. Metaphysical naturalism is the idea that there is no other reality than material nature. There is no supernature, and therefore there is no God. ID proponents believe that methodological naturalism, the method of science, leads to metaphysical naturalism, and therefore to atheism and to the loss of our cultural moorings. ID proponents argue that methodological naturalism, the method of science, leads inevitably to metaphysical naturalism. That is, the belief that everything, all reality, is comprehended in nature, and that there is no supernatural reality. There are no supernatural causes. Now, scientists would argue that that's not a necessary link, but in fact, you do find among scientists a large number who have no faith in a creator, and ID proponents say, see, science leads to metaphysical naturalism, leads to atheism. And it's important to note, too, that they trace social ills, moral decline in America and in the world, to this metaphysical naturalism. If there is no God, if humans are merely biological machines, then morality is relative. Then there is no divine sovereign to guarantee the political and social order. And so you have moral decline, moral chaos, because of this naturalism that they see coming out of science. And that's why they don't want evolutionary science taught in the school classroom as the exclusive explanation for the emergence of life. They believe this is corrupting our children, that the souls of America's children are at stake in this argument, and that putting intelligent design into the curriculum of the science classroom is an antidote to moral decline and social disorder.